All right, well, good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me in back? Do I need to actually come down like this? Oh. All right, well, I want to welcome you guys to this morning's water forum, and I want to recognize the sponsors. The prime sponsor of this is Rome Grange, and we want to make sure we thank everybody from the Rome Grange for putting this on. And then also some of the the co-sponsors. We have Whatcom Realtors Association, Whatcom Business Alliance, Whatcom Cattlemen's Association, Whatcom Farm Bureau, Citizens Alliance for Property Rights, Whatcom Chapter, and Whatcom Well Owners Caucus. So thank you to all the groups that have come together to really put this event on. And thank you to the speakers who are going to be presenting to us, and to the members of the community who are here to learn more about water and to understand and to talk about the debate that's going on. So to start out with, I wanted to, everybody's heard the quote, water is for fighting, whiskey's for drinking. So I wanted to start out this morning with a little illustrative of that that quote by Mark Twain. So this morning, as I was kind of getting ready, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be speaking, so I'm going to bring my bottle of water, and nothing controversial about that, right? Except, well, now Western's banned plastic water bottles, so I can't use this now, and Bellingham's talking about it. So then I'm like, well, I've got my great Nalgene bottle. I've had this thing for years. This thing is virtually indestructible. I can use this for drinking water. But then I realized this is a Clinton-era pre-ban BPA-infused plastic water bottle. Well, crap. So I can't even use that because there's controversy in that. So then I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to go to Woods, grab coffee. Well, this year, in the last couple of years in the legislature, there's been a push for making coffee the official beverage of Washington State. How could that be controversial, right? Well, then the dairy industry came in and said, well, wait, we were here way before coffee was. We think we should be the beverage of Washington State because we have a large production of milk here. And so you'll all be happy to know that this is actually a latte, so it's kind of a mix between coffee and milk. So in a bipartisan fashion, went with that. But there's even controversy there. But you'll be happy to know in Washington State, we did this year get an official state oyster. It is the Olympic oyster is now the official state oyster. We also have the official waterfall of Washington State as of this year is the Palouse Falls. I said, why not Nooksack Falls or why not some of our other falls? But the Palouse Falls it is because apparently that's one of the largest, and it's also a dry fall, one of the largest areas out there. So, trying to find something non-controversial to talk about in the, so water's basically out, coffee's out because that's too controversial. So I just decided, I'm just going to take and bring my whiskey. But then I figured, well, scotch. But then I figured, public drunkenness of a public official probably is not the best thing. So that's why it's empty. So I decided, I'll put that away and I'll just put everything back into my nice bag because nothing could be controversial about plastic bags in this area. So as we moving on, water is obviously a controversial topic, and it will always be a controversial topic. It has always been a controversial topic as well. So one of the opportunities that I've had, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Vincent. I'm one of the state representatives here for Whatcom County. I represent all of Whatcom County outside of Bellingham and the northern half of Bellingham. I've been doing this for 4 years now, just finishing up my second term. And one of the opportunities that I've been given is a leadership role down in the House Republican Caucus. I am the House Minority Leader, or the ranking member on agriculture and natural resource, and with that comes legislation that deals with water. And in my tenure down in Olympia, I've been working on water law and some of the controversial issues of water law, but then I've also had the opportunity to go around the U.S. in some regards. I went down to Oklahoma City this past year when I just first got the appointment to the Ag and Natural Resource Committee as the ranking member to a state ag and rural leaders conference that was going on down there. And one of the breakout sessions that they had was water law and kind of some of the issues surrounding water law. And this is a national conference, so we have members from around the United States, including some members from BC And we had the ag director from Ireland, which was very interesting to hear from him about issues, not only in the Americas, but also over back in Europe. So in the water breakout group, it was very interesting to hear some of the issues. A lot of our agriculture land in Washington, or in the United States, is based in what's called the aquifer called the Ogallala. And it's a unique area. We deal with water basins here and aquifers here, which you look at the deal, there's 5, 10, 15 different aquifers and basins just in our little area. Well, the Ogallala covers, I think it's 5, 10, 15 states. It's a huge area of the Midwest, and it's a lot of the water that comes down off of the Rockies. But it's unique in that it does not have a recharge. So this is basically water mining that they have to deal with, and they are also, because they're west of the Mississippi River, they're also in Western water law, which is what we are under versus the prior appropriations. So it's interesting hearing some of the discussions there, because there are actual states that when you get into water law, you hear things such as relinquishment. There are certain states in the United States that have actually gotten rid of their relinquishment aspect, the use it or lose it. In Washington State, you have 5 years you have to continually keep your water in beneficial use. Otherwise, if it's not in a beneficial use for 5 years, then you relinquish that water right. And there are states around the U.S. that have actually been able to pull out that portion of their statute so to where you don't lose your water law. There's also a couple states around the nation that have they view water not as a state resource. It is a state resource, but the water underneath your property is your physical property right. It is your physical water. You own the water beneath your property. And so there's a lot of different issues that come up with the different laws that go around the U.S. It's not all the same, and it's very interesting seeing some of the issues that they deal with in the Ogallala Basin, because there is no recharge and they are water mining. What happens when you get to the bottom of that water mine and there's no more water left? Yeah, and so these are issues that they're dealing with. We have a very good recharge system here. But so as you see, water is and will continue to be controversial. So today we've got, looks like 5 speakers. I don't know, did our 6th speaker is not here. So we're going to start off, and the format is going to be this. We're going to allow our speakers, I think they're given about 10 minutes apiece they were given 4 questions that they'll try to get the answers to in their presentation. And about 10 minutes, and they're going to talk about some of the issues that they're passionate about and some of their concerns that they see. And so then we're going to go through all the members of the panel on that, and then we're going to open it up for a question and answer period. And in that question and answer period, just to be clear, we're going to allow 1 minute for a question and 3 minutes for an answer. And please, when you're asking your question, make sure you keep it a question and no bloviating, no comments. Just ask a question and sit down. The shorter we're able to keep our questions, the more succinct, the more questions we can get at, and the more time it gives us for hearing from the panel members. So with that, I'm going to open it up, and Carl Weimer, who is one of our county council members, he is 9 years on the county council and very involved in environmental issues and water issues, and so we're going to ask him to come forward, and he's got a presentation. So everybody welcome Carl Weimer.
Good morning. Our other speaker may be late because I found out trying to rush down here that there wasn't a lot of planning because all the streets north of here are closed. So trying to get here is kind of an adventure right now, and I broke numerous laws that I don't want on the record. They gave us 10 minutes. They asked us to answer 3 questions and then choose another question, and I think I will answer those as I go through here. It's nice being the first one. Is this speaker good enough? It's nice being the first one because then everybody else can repeat everything that I've said. One of the questions they asked about was, what do you think the water problems in the county are? And one of the other questions was, what is this Whatcom Water Action Plan that the Whatcom County Council recently passed a unanimous resolution on? And what do you think about it? Well, I think it's a brilliant idea. You know, whoever wrote it was just brilliant. I wrote it, so that's an easy answer. What it really is, it's not a new plan. You know, we have numerous plans in this county dealing with a whole bunch of water issues. What it is the county council saying they are going to really take a hard look at water issues this year, look at all the plans, try to prioritize those for where we can get the biggest bang for the buck, and then as we move into our 2-year budget cycle this fall, look at allocating money to start addressing some of the water issues. You know, we've heard from the community across the county, whether it's the ag community, the tribal community, people worried about their water rights in their individual wells. Everybody seems to be coming together on water issues and wants some action. All kinds of different issues, and I'll talk about some of those, but there seems to be a coming together of the community. When we get into the details, maybe we won't still be together, but at this point, everybody wants some action on water issues. If you want to see the actual resolution, the link is there, and I think that this is going to be provided on the website afterwards, so you don't have to try to copy down that awful looking thing. Just what are the big issues, water issues that I'm concerned about? One of the top ones is just the lack of sustainable salmon fishery anymore. Salmon was a historical major industry here, both for the tribal members, it's their culture, and for others, and certainly it's been in decline. That graph just shows Chinook returns in the last, since the mid-'80s, and that's starting at a level that already was low. So one of the issues is salmon recovery, and that includes everything that has to do with salmon, habitat, in-stream flows, temperature issues, the whole range of things, and it really talks to the health of our ecosystem when you talk about bringing salmon back. Bacterial pollution of our surface waters. This is another one that is kind of across the county. The Drayton Harbor Shellfish District, Drayton Harbor Shellfish has been closed for a number of years. We've improved that enough that it has a seasonal opening now. They can harvest shellfish certain times of the year. Portage Bay, which produces hundreds of thousands of dollars of income for the tribal shellfish fishermen, was closed. It's open again now, but if you look at this chart, this is water monitoring of bacteria. The red line is the safe limit for bacteria in shellfish. You can see back in the early 90s, we were way above that. We had a real problem. Through a bunch of actions, voluntary actions by farmers, enforcement actions by a variety of agencies, we really drove those numbers down to where we got under the line and the shellfish beds were allowed to reopen. Just the last few years, those bacterial numbers are starting to ramp up again, and some of the monitoring stations in Portage Bay are now, they're not threatened. They haven't gone over the line, but they're threatened. So that's a big issue for a whole number of reasons. And that bacterial pollution comes from a range of things. It comes from agricultural practices. It comes from people not picking up their pet waste. It comes from septic systems. Everywhere we've used microbial source tracking, DNA tracking, to look at what the problem is, we found the whole range. It's not one thing that's causing that problem. Stormwater runoff, kind of a related issue, and it's the major problem in our urban areas. Everything you put on your lawn can end up out into the bay or into our creeks and rivers. I think these are some posters that Department of Ecology developed a few years ago showing that, you know, whether it's dog poo, fertilizer, washing your car, chemicals we use in urban areas can end up in the water because it's usually a straight shot to stormwater. It's a major urban problem. It's also a rural problem because, you know, anything on fields actually gets washed off in stormwater too. Stormwater can really increase the flow in creeks, so it's a damaging thing for salmon because all of a sudden, instead of the rain slowly working its way through the soil, it can rush into the streams and cause all kinds of erosion problems. If you live in Lake Whatcom, one of the biggest issues for you is the phosphorus pollution in Lake Whatcom. And we have a multi-year coordinated plan with the city, the water district, and the county working on that. And we're just about to be under an order any year now, the TMDL from the Department of Ecology, which basically says we have to reduce the amount of phosphorus going into the lake by 87%, which is a huge task. We just got some initial numbers the other day. We're talking in the area of $90 million to accomplish that. And a lot of what needs to happen has to be on private property. So the 7,000 plus houses in the watershed need to do something to retrofit the way water is running off those properties to keep that phosphorus into the ground instead of washing into the lake. Groundwater pollution, particularly in the north part of the county. There's some serious nitrate pollution in the groundwater, making some of the water fairly undrinkable. All these red spots here, this is depending who you talk to, it's either the Sumas Abbotsford Aquifer, or the Blaine Sumas Aquifer, but it comes across the border. And all these red dots are places where clearly the nitrate level is way over the health limit. Yellow dots are over the health limit too, and down from there. And it's not like they've tested everywhere. These are just kind of the wells they've tested. So it shows there's a big pollution problem of groundwater in the North County. People ask where that's coming from. This is out of a most recent report from the Department of Ecology, kind of talking about where they think the nitrates come from. And it's again, all kinds of things: agricultural practices, fertilizers, irrigation, septic systems. Water rights, which I think a lot of people here are here today trying to figure out who's got water, who's got legal water, and who doesn't. And that's one of the questions that I think is the hardest one to figure out and to solve. We're under Western water law, which basically says first in time, first in right. So whoever was here first gets the first water rights. There's lots of uncertainty about how to solve this issue because the tribal rights, clearly the people who were here first and the salmon that they depend on have the first right, but that amount of water hasn't legally been defined yet. The tribes have gone to the federal government and have asked for that. So at some point the feds are going to come in and start trying to define what that amount is. A lot of the other people who actually already have water rights have an amount defined in that. There's a whole lot of people on a list that don't have legal water rights yet, and I suspect Doug will talk way more about this than I'm going to. And then the in-stream flows, the amount of water in the streams that support salmon, that was defined a number of years ago, and there's lots of discussion that that amount of water needs to be looked at more carefully and either increased or decreased depending on the science. So lots of issues. The first in time, first in right actually means that you have the right to go out and drill a well on your property. That doesn't mean you have a right to use the water that comes out of that well, because as the amount of water in the streams is defined, it may be that those people that were there first are using all the water that we're legally allowed to take out of the streams, and if you're far enough down the list, you could be curtailed. That can be private well owners, it could be agriculture, it could even be some of the small cities. This just is a map of the county, and it shows kind of the in-stream flows, water rights allocation status. Everything in red, which is most of the developed areas of the county, is already closed to additional water withdrawals. And that's where a lot of the discussion is about, okay, so if I have an exempt well, is that an additional water withdrawal or not? And that's not totally clear at this point. And this was one of the additional questions of who uses water in those areas, so I tried to answer that with this slide. And you can see that it depends on what time of the year you look at who's using the water. On these months, it's mainly this blue area, which is municipalities and industrial. But when you start getting into the summer, it switches to green, which is ag for irrigation and those types of things. So depending on the time of the year, who's using the most water changes. And the problem we have is that when the ag starts using a lot of water here, it's also the time of the year when our creeks have the least water in it, and you start getting into that conflict between water use and in-stream flows. Flood drainage issues, we have those all over. It was reminded to us dramatically in Snohomish County here not long ago. We have some of the same issues in Whatcom County with flood slides, those types of things. Lots of drainage issues on ag land. They can't get into their property and do the work they need in the spring because of lack of drainage and conflicting regulations. So what's the solution? Well, I think the solution is getting input. So that's one of the things that's part of the Water Action Plan, asking for all of our different advisory groups to give us input. I've put up a survey asking people for input on a whole bunch of issues. That's the link. I'd love to get more people to take it. I think about 200 people have so far. It's kind of heavily weighted towards Bellingham at this point, so it'd be great if people out in the county started weighing in on that. We need to prioritize projects, we need to come up with funding, and then we just need to do things. We have 9 advisory committees that give us advice on water issues, the county does, along with all the agencies and intergovernmental agencies. So we get a lot of good advice, and a lot of these people know way more. I mean, if you look at the county council, we are not the brightest bulbs when it comes to these water issues. We really need to depend on these advisory committees that drill down into specific issues that deal with ag and shellfish and marine issues to give us good advice. And we have a lot of those committees. It's just then trying to take that and prioritize it. We currently have a list of about 300 projects that we've got from those advisory committees and others that adds up to, I can't remember what the total is. John might know, but it's over $200 million worth of projects. We don't spend anywhere near that much. You know, we might spend $2, $3, $4 million a year on water. So if we're going to make a significant chunk of this, we really need to prioritize these projects. This list is already prioritized to some degree. Councilmember Nelson and I worked on this about 8 years ago, coming up with a god-awful convoluted system to prioritize the flood versus salmon versus shellfish issues. So it's there, and there's a link right there if you want to go look at that list and see where they fall on the priorities. You probably find your pet project on that list somewhere. That's already in the works. We're going to revisit that over the summer. And the other reality is that I think in many cases for water issues, especially a lot of the water quality issues, we really know what needs to be done. We just haven't done it yet. And some of that is funding, and some of it comes down to my last slide, which is just sustained political will to make a difference on these issues. It's when you get into the details on these water issues, no matter which way you go, you're going to annoy some constituent base. So guess what? Politicians like to put it off till later or take the easy route out, which is not to spend money to fix things. Hopefully over our study for the action plan, we're going to take a hard look at some of these this year and start making some decisions, and it might tick off some people in the room, but we're not going to fix any of these problems without there being some pain. I think the one good thing, we have all these advisory committees, we have a multi-stakeholder group, the planning unit, which ought to come together and give us some input on how we can reduce the pain and how we can come up with the best solution that hurts the fewest amount of people. But if we do nothing, things are just going to continue to get worse. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. At this time, we're going to move to, let's see. It's like we got John Hutching from City of Bellingham. John Hutching is a hydrologist, a soil scientist by training. He has spent 20 years serving communities around the West in their efforts to resolve difficult land and water resource challenges. His career has traversed Idaho onion farmers, Nevada high desert ranches, and the bluegrass fields of Washington's own Rathdrum prairies. The themes are familiar: urbanization, agriculture, water quality, settling inequalities of the past, and preparing for difficult decisions about water allocation. John's experience have paved the way for funding of the Central Nevada Regional Water Authority, followed by 5 years as Assistant Public Works Director at Whatcom County. John presently works for City of Bellingham Public Works, overseeing the city's new Natural Resource Division. So everybody please welcome John.
Well, thank you. And I guess to kick this off, I believe that we live at a good time, and we live in a good place in which we can have some influence over these difficult decisions. And when I say we live at a good time, what I mean is that most of you in this room are old enough to remember the sort of shock and awe we felt when the Iron Curtain was pulled back, and we got to see what years and years of industrialization had done to some environments and to some economies in Central Europe. And actually that sort of hit home with me recently when just this week the Chinese government released a report that demonstrated the implications of mismanagement perhaps of their environment on their economy. And it calls for some pretty heady change in how they do business over in China. And here we are in Washington's fourth corner with beautiful mountains, with water everywhere, with people who are engaged in these kinds of conversations. And yes, we have some issues that we need to get our arms around, some hard decisions to make. But the bottom line is we have a political system, an economic system, and the resources by which we ought, if anybody, be able to get through these kinds of decisions and do so with some equity, do so with some certainty that the future looks bright for our children and grandchildren. And I think it's hard sometimes to stay positive about these issues because they do look so daunting, especially when they affect you personally, your family personally. But you always got to keep an eye on the long game. So I don't have a fancy presentation today, but what I would like to do is, short of going through the list that Carl just put forward about all of those issues we've got to deal with, because they're all real, they're all out there, I'd like to focus a little bit more on those that are pertinent to the city of Bellingham. And you know, it's been a great experience for me just in the last year and a half to look at things from the city's perspective and understand that you know, there's some expectation placed on the administration of the city of Bellingham by the electorate for us to be good stewards of our resources, those within the jurisdiction of the city of Bellingham, and also to have some influence on good management of those resources outside its boundaries. And when I say that, I mean specifically the supply of clean and affordable drinking water, not just this year, next year, 5 years from now, but 50 years or 100 years from now. That's the kind of planning horizon that it's necessary to look at to make sure that we are stewarding those resources in the right way. And then the availability of what goes with that water, that is food around the boundaries of the city of Bellingham, around our perimeter, and that means harvestable excess of salmon, that means viable agricultural lands, a viable agricultural economy. And you know, this idea that the city has an interest in keeping farmlands growing farm products, on recovering salmon in the river, that's not something new. That's something that generations of city administrations have been saying, generations of city councils have been contemplating. And in as much as it relates to the second question that we've been asked, and that has to do with the resolution that Councilmember Weimer was talking about, in as much as the city's interests cross with those issues that Carl brought forward, of course, the city is very willing, and in as much as it is able, to help resolve some of those issues. And we have some tools available to do that. Of course, we have resources in the way of staff and those sorts of things that we can help deal with some of those cross-jurisdictional issues. And so what are they? Well, of course, Lake Whatcom is one that is always front and center for us. Resolution of the question of water allocation on the Nooksack River is another issue. The city has pretty substantial water right on the Middle Fork that it diverts through Lake Whatcom, and it supplements the city's drinking water supply. And in as much as we have a long-term plan for the use of that water, there is excess water that is not used on a day-to-day basis today that certainly could be used under the right conditions to help resolve some of the downstream water issues. And but in order to do that, it's necessary to understand what the needs are downstream and what the conditions of that use might be. And that gets to question number 3 that asks about the concept of water supply planning. And you know, there has been a lot of work done around questions of water availability and water supply. And I'm just going to thump a couple of reports up here so you can see how big the stack is. And these are not the planning documents. These are rather the technical analyses that have been done to help support good decision making about water allocation. And in this stack of reports is a 2010 State of the Watershed report that looks at all of the different watersheds in what we affectionately call WIRA 1, Water Resource Area 1, and talks about the sources and uses and various land uses associated with the watersheds, has all kinds of information from water quality to water quantity. Underlying that is a great big thick water budget. A water budget is an accounting of water use and looks at the various water uses by sub-area, and is the basis on which the kinds of decisions and the kinds of solutions might be made. But unfortunately, what we haven't done here in the Nooksack Basin is developed a really good understanding of the groundwater and how groundwater relates to surface water. And of course, from a salmon recovery standpoint, it's the surface water that is really the concern. And from an agricultural standpoint, it's a little of both, but mostly groundwater. And so the solution, in other words, the simplest way of getting ourselves to a point where we can begin to talk about solutions is to pursue that understanding. Now, there has been some work done over the years, some academic modeling and that sort of thing, but kind of work that doesn't lend itself all that well to the kinds of questions that we are faced with. Most recently, an assessment was done of the groundwater data, the information that's available that might help us gather up what's necessary, what a necessary next step is to understand that connection between the surface water and the groundwater. And this document was developed and finalized at the end of 2013, and I think sets us up for the next step in this analysis, which is developing that the models that help us predict what happens if you move water from point A to point B, what happens if you allow agricultural irrigation wells to continue pumping in certain places, and the relationship between the drawdown in those wells and the in-stream flow, say in Bertrand Creek or the like. And that's the kind of information that we need to have a firm grasp on in order to come up with some scenarios that we can then begin talking around. So I know for a fact that that question has been contemplated in some detail by the various governments that are involved and some of the ag community and Department of Ecology and others. And I think we're at a juncture now where we're set to finalize a plan, put forward a proposal to spend some money to get that work done. And I think that will be a big step in the right direction, and it makes me pleased to know that we're continuing, despite all of the uproar over water, we're continuing to provide the technical information that ultimately is going to be necessary for good decisions. So, you know, I'm a bit of an optimist. I think all of these questions we're asking are very, very important. It is pressing that we continue to work mightily to get the information necessary, but our world isn't going to turn upside down tomorrow if we don't solve these problems by tomorrow. We need to have a clear path forward. We need to understand what the outcomes are and not be frightened of those outcomes. In other words, we have to have some certainty and agreement that these outcomes are, that we can live within the boundaries of these outcomes. So the last question on this list is, can Bellingham help the farmers? And at the risk of speaking for people who aren't up here, one of them's sitting right there, Michael, there's a couple of other council members, I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say yes in a number of ways. I think the city of Bellingham has a real interest in securing viable agricultural economy out in the county for its future. I mean, it's a little bit of a selfish interest for the city of Bellingham, but it's there. It has a real interest in making sure that there is a viable salmon population in the Nooksack River, or populations. And we can offer some help there. I think that we have a body of technical knowledge that we can provide to the bigger question. I think that is very helpful. And ultimately, in as much as the city has water available, that water can be used also to help the problem. And I guess let me wrap that up by suggesting to you or telling you that that concept of moving water downstream is not something new. It's something that has been around for at least 10 years. There have been conversations among the various councils, the various mayors. It has been part of negotiations with the various tribes, those sorts of things, as a mechanism to initiate a solution to this water allocation problem on the Nooksack River. And in as much as it has been like that for the last 10 years, I can't see that would be pulled off the table. So I think that's good. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John. And I just want to take a brief moment to let everybody know that this facility is obviously provided by the library, and we want to take a moment to thank the library for offering up this facility and the use of it. If you have other events that you'd like to host here, I'm sure the library, the Bellingham Public Library, would be welcome to assist you in that. So with the consent of the body, we're going to change up the schedule just a little bit. Marty Maberry, who represents some of the agriculture, he's using technology today with his questions, and his phone battery is dying, so he requested that I allow him. So if the body consents, we're going to allow Marty Maberry to come and present next. And Marty represents the agriculture community. He's also been active. He has a few acres of berries in Whatcom County. You may have heard of them. Some raspberries, a few strawberries, and a few blueberries, and maybe some cranberries or something too. So no cranberries. So if you will, welcome Marty Maberry.
Thanks, Vince. I think these iPhones, my renewal date's 1st of June, and the battery runs out a couple months prior, and I have a lifeline of about an hour. So I'm here representing the Ag District Coalition. Randy Honkoop was supposed to be here, but he got laryngitis last night or yesterday afternoon, and so here I am. You get what you get. I'm a farmer. I'm not a politician. I'm not a bureaucrat, and you get what you get when you get me. Like I said, I'm here representing Ag District Coalition. Ag District Coalition is an effort on the part of a number of farmers to unite agriculture, and that map up there you see is, I believe, a map of the different watersheds in the county to organize agriculture in a series of what we call watershed improvement districts. They're formed under the irrigation district statute, so they have quasi-governmental powers to develop a stable, funded group that can represent our farmers in different areas that have different needs and different interests based on a number of water issues, water quality, like Carl said, fecal coliform, nitrates, those kinds of things. Obviously water quantity, water rights, flood issues, erosion issues, drainage issues. Each area, you can't put agriculture in one monolithic category of what are the biggest priorities in each one. So it was our concept to organize agriculture somewhat similar to the way our county and our country has organized its interests in smaller entities, and then hopefully forming a joint board where at some point you will be negotiating, at some point you will be advocating for the interests of agriculture. So that's a explanation of Ag District Coalition. That being said, Ag District Coalition is just a formation group. Ag District Coalition has no positions whatsoever on policy. There are other entities in the agricultural industry right now that are doing that, but we're just simply a formation board. So these questions become impossible for me to answer representing the Ag District Coalition, but as an individual, I will speak to whatever these questions that I possibly can speak to. That being said, you know, I've got a day job, and I don't have the answers to all the questions, but I do have my opinions, and I have worked on this issue for 20 years. So basically, how I see the issues are twofold. As far as water supply, and in relationship to agriculture, we have two major issues. We have, as been said, some under-permitted water uses, some non-permitted. It runs a varying different degree. I mean, when you hear, you know, illegal water use, okay, it's not that simple. The water code is not simple. A lot of times you'll have a farmer that owns 80 acres. He's got a water right. He's got enough gallons per minute. He's got enough acre footage. He just doesn't have enough acres on that piece of paper. And Vince talked about use it or lose it. Agriculture is the only water user that has that provision. And it causes huge problems for us in this situation, because in that situation, all you'd need to do is say, okay, I'm just going to transfer half that water right over to that other 40, and I'm fine. So it's not quite that simple, and it becomes more complex after that. So we have state issues. We have state issues with the water code. And then also, we talked about the tribal treaty rights and the request for quantification, which can sound a little bit innocuous. It's not. And it's not just related to agriculture. Essentially, what the tribes are asking for is to quantify minimum stream flows in all the streams in Whatcom County, and that becomes their water right, their time immemorial, first in time, first in right water right. If those streams don't meet minimum flow, and by the way, they won't, because they don't already, then you shut junior users down one by one, and it'd be my estimation that in most agricultural areas, you would shut everything off and you still wouldn't reach the flow rate. Now, we're talking mostly groundwater. Okay, I might be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. And so there's different degrees of opinions about how strong their position is. But it's certainly been my position to take the proposed outcome as if they will be correct. And so a lot of these questions are designed at things that basically talk about that. So there's a lot of things that are going on. You know, I'm going to answer the questions that I think, you know, haven't been necessarily answered before. I'll start with, you know, can Bellingham help the farmers? I think Bellingham could possibly be a piece of the puzzle to help the whole community, not just farmers. But as I look at things and have studied the issues, I think the city of Bellingham's water, as far as the degrees, the question about helping farmers, might be best used as mitigation water versus just direct supply. Number one, the water from the city of Bellingham will be expensive, probably unaffordable for most farmers. But I think we can get a higher bang for our buck as people need to shore up their water rights, using the city of Bellingham as mitigation water, i.e. potentially dumping it into the streams, and allowing people that don't have adequate water rights to get them. In other words, with the hydrological modeling that was just talked about, you can, with reasonable degree of accuracy, determine how much your groundwater diversion is affecting the stream. There could be a lot of areas that it doesn't affect it. There could be areas where it doesn't affect it till December during flood stage. So that work is really important. But then, once you can determine what the impact is, the city of Bellingham possibly, along with maybe Blaine, Birch Bay, maybe PUD, could be used as mitigation water. So if you pump 100 gallons a minute and your impact is 10 to the stream, you can leverage that water out over a much larger piece. So in other words, instead of 100 gallons a minute going in the stream, you put 10 gallons a minute into the stream, and you've negated your impact to that stream. These are pretty weird ideas, but that's where you got to go when you start thinking about solutions. A question was asked about Carl's plan. We don't see any problem with it. We made some suggestions. It was my opinion that it might have been weighted possibly a little bit too much towards the environment and not enough balance towards the needs of the community. I think we expressed that. But overall, we are pleased that these issues are beginning to rise to the surface, and the more people that become concerned about this, I think the better off we are. Another question was asked about, it's been talked about pumping water into the streams as mitigation, used to get more water in the streams. I know there's differences of opinions, but it's my opinion that we have to take seriously the needs of the environment, the fishery, the tribal interests, because if it goes there, whether we win or not, there still is an Endangered Species Act. There are minimum stream flows in place now by the state, and I just believe it's prudent to be talking about potential solutions. Mitigation would be one. We have a lot of water in this county, okay? I think most people in this room, probably agree with that. We do have stream flow issues in the summer, but we have a huge reservoir. We have a huge storage area. It's under the ground. Unfortunately, the Department of Ecology came up with the concept of hydraulic continuity, which, it's a scientific fact. Unfortunately, the limit of impact is 1 molecule, and I don't think there's anybody in this room can prove that they're not impacting a stream from, any water use anywhere, 1 molecule. And it's been held up in court. So we have to deal with that. So when you hear mitigation, pumping water into streams, we have new well drilling technology today that can pump a lot of water in areas that we never could before, finding areas where you're in very little continuity to the streams and augmenting the flow, I think is one of the reasonable solutions that are out there. Work is being done as we speak, as farmers get off streams and onto groundwater. They should be rewarded for that. In my opinion, and Ecology is working with us, but the water code is complicated, and a lot of people are watching their decisions, and there's lawsuits that are filed all the time. So they have to be sure of their science. But that's nothing but a good thing. Bertrand's probably pulled off 3,000 gallons a minute over the last 3 years. As farmers look at the situation and go, even though we have rights on these streams, we got to get off. And that's nothing but a good thing for the fishery. It doesn't get much publicity because we don't want any publicity. But there are good things happening. Goal number 1 should be, as much as we possibly can, is to get the diversions off the streams. That's the low-hanging fruit. Other things, we don't really have a comprehensive deep water aquifer study in this community. I mean, I don't know how many of you read, just the other day, City of Seattle found an underwater river that they estimate being bigger than the Columbia and the Amazon River combined. We spend a lot of money on plans and on on talking. It's the position of agriculture that we would like to move on to solution-based things and move forward doing projects that are clearly beneficial for the streams and clearly beneficial for the users. And it looks like my time's up. I got a lot more things I could say, but thanks for your time.
Well, thank you, Marty. And once again, we want to thank the Rome Grange for helping to put this on. And at this point, is Randy Kinley here from the Lummi tribe or anybody representing the Lummi tribe? Okay. Not seeing anybody, we're going to move to Steve Jilk, who's the manager of the Whatcom Public Utility District. And he provided kind of a resume, so I'm just going to pull out a few things here. He's currently general manager of the Public Utility District, prior director of Economic Development and Marine Services for Port of Bellingham, city administrator for the city of Linden for 7.5 years, city administrator, executive director for cities of Port in Minnesota, 15 years, degree in business administration, economics, computer science, past chair of Whatcom County Health Advisory Board, leadership Whatcom Healthy Communities, current Linden School District Board president, represented smaller cities, Portland and PUD on water resource planning projects such as Weimer 1, Sumas Abbotsford International Aquifer Task Force. In other words, this guy's got a lot of experience with water and with planning and with government. So help me welcome Steve Jilk.
One thing that Vince left off my comments for my bio that they asked me to turn in was that today my wife and I are celebrating our 46th wedding anniversary. And as of 10:25 this morning, I think it's my wife is celebrating our wedding anniversary. Thank you. And one of the things that I prepared a few comments, but after following the speakers that you've already heard this morning, I think what I'd really like to do is just comment on some of their comments because my comments were prepared to respond to the 4 questions that were sent out. And I think that especially Carl and Marty really highlighted just a lot of the things good things that are going on, a lot of, and how complicated some of the issues are around water supply in the county. But I'd also like to just make a few comments about, as Vince indicated, my time in the county is now about 20 and a half years. I started working for the city of Linden back in November of 1993, and I always tell a story about I started working on Monday morning. I reported to work on Monday morning with the city. Monday afternoon I got a call from Tom Anderson, who was then the general manager at the PUD, and asked if I would like to attend a meeting with the county, the city of Bellingham, the PUD, and representing at that point some of the smaller communities in Whatcom County to talk about water supply planning. So that was November 3rd of 1993. And what I've accumulated over this 20 years in terms of understanding the issues around water supply in Whatcom County is really summed up in a few words. One, there is enough water here in the county to meet all of our needs. I truly believe that. Second, we've spent a lot of money and produced a lot of good collaborative data, a lot of good collaborative thinking around how to fix some of the problems that Carl highlighted, whether it's water quality, whether it's stream flow, whether it's water quantity in certain areas of the county. But one of the things that we have not done, and I truly believe this, is that there has never been a single identified process to bring all the decision makers together and identify how important it is to address water quantity in this county and how we can do that on a collaborative way. And that's not a criticism of any of our elected officials. It's not a criticism of any of those that have engaged in a lot of work and spent a lot of your dollars, your tax dollars, to do what we've done. But just as an example, I'll just talk about a few things that the PUD has tried to do over the last maybe 15 years. We're currently working with Department of Health and Department of Ecology and several of the small water associations up in Northeast County about trying to find a solution for their nitrate contaminated wells and their nitrate contaminated source of supply. And when you see how there are some fairly simple, fairly, I would say, cost-effective solutions to getting water to these water associations who are now under red tag operating conditions by the Department of Health because of the nitrate level. But you work for, the PUD has been working with these water associations, and the City of Linden has been working with these water associations for somewhere around almost 20 years to try to find a solution. And we're spending thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars coming up with a potential solution that's probably going to cost a couple of $1 million to get clean water to a couple of water associations, when a much more cost-effective, simple solution would be to use additional water out of the river. But you're up against water rights issues, you're up against tribal issues, and you're lacking a coordinated, collaborative, regional working effort to utilize the water that we have in the basin. There was comments about the nitrate problem in North County and the Sumas Abbotsford Aquifer. There's comments I know that have been out in the media, at least in the last few months, that that it's just in the last few years that people have been wanting to address some of these issues. The Sumas Abbotsford Aquifer Task Force, International Task Force, has been working with British Columbia, with our federal government, for, again, well over 20 years. My point in bringing these issues up is that, and one last example is that the City of Linden, when I was working at the City of Linden back in 1998, we were advised by Department of Ecology that the city was overpumping its water rights, the quantity, annual quantity, what is referred to as the QA. Water rights, municipal water rights, typically have two different quantities identified with them. One is what's called the QI, which is the amount of water that you can take, whether it's out of groundwater or out of the surface, at any one time. You know, today, right now, at 10:32. And the other is what's referred to as the QA, the amount that you can take out total for the year. And the City of Linden was identified, or told, advised by the Department of Ecology then, that their QA was being exceeded. The PUD has been working with the City of Linden since then, and the City of Bellingham, which has brought up some of the ideas that John Hutching referred to, that the city looking to move water downstream to be taken out. Thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars have been spent on looking at engineering pipeline, moving water rights, where the PUD has water rights downstream at Ferndale, near Ferndale, about moving water upstream and serving agriculture, serving the City of Linden, and serving some of these other water associations. Consistently bouncing up or meeting problems in terms of regulatory use of those water rights, where you can use them, and so forth. But when you look at, and this is where my experience in the county working on water issues for these some 20 years, you identify very, very simple, cost-effective solutions to meeting water needs out of stream. And until there is a consolidated, collaborative, I believe, working group that identifies that their sole purpose in life is to find water, how to move it around, and reuse it, conserve it, and how that meets our regulatory needs, I don't think we're going to be very successful. So the other is a comment about Councilmember Weimer's proposal, the Water Action Plan. I believe that's the right approach, but I do believe that what we need to do is to look at these 300-some projects that the county has on their list, less as projects, and try to look at how we can consolidate our water planning, not watershed planning necessarily for in-stream flow, and not necessarily how we handle the contamination problem for shellfish, but how do we look at water as a resource and how we meld all of our thinking around the use of water into every decision that we make in terms of land use, in terms of how we can manage the resource instead of saying, how can we find new water, how can we clean up this problem or that problem. An example is that several years ago when that list was first put together, I attended some of the council member or the council workshops on that. And that started out, in my understanding, that it started out as a request to try to figure out just what I believe that Carl is proposing now, is how the council can look at the issue of water management in the county with an umbrella over that thinking. What it ended up, though, was a list of projects, very specific projects, so that the council could look at an individual project request for funding and say, should we fund this project, should we fund this project? But I believe until we bring Department of Health, we bring flood management, we bring planning and development together, public works together, and really force the thinking of how every decision that's made in those individual departments, how they come forward to the county council and to other elected bodies in the county, that we put that sort of that screen or that test of how does that relate, that decision and that project and that plan, how does that relate to finding water for agriculture? How does that, how do we look at a flood management project and look at the possibility of storage for off-stream storage? It's that kind of thinking that I think that we really need to bring to the elected officials. The other, I left a little information sheet on at the table over there on what the PUD does. I don't think that a lot of folks understand what the public utility district is and what it does, and there's some information over there. I would say this, that the other thing that I've come to understand after working with the PUD now for 8 years is that the PUD holds significant water rights on the Nooksack River. We hold just about 54 million gallon a day water right. Fairly secure, considering its location on the main stem, and also with the municipal water law that was passed in 2003 and then went through the Washington Supreme Court in terms of how secure municipal rights are. And one of the things that I've found in trying to represent our public utility commissioners, our 3 elected commissioners, in using our water rights to try to be a problem solver or a solution to the water needs in the rest of the county. And one of the perspectives that I have always brought to try to bring to my administration in public service for municipalities and cities and now the PUD is that take a very pragmatic approach. Figure out what's needed and then try to figure out why we can't get it done. And one of the things that I think that we've identified over the years with trying to find a way to use the PUD's water rights, which we have authority to use throughout Whatcom County, is that we keep bouncing up against both regulatory and political pushback. And I think that unless we do look at this as a regional solution or as a regional problem and open up the idea of working, having the folks with the water rights available in the basin, that's the only way we're going to solve the problem. So with that.
Well, thank you. And last but not least, we have Doug Ellen. And Doug Ellen is the manager at the Bellingham Field Office for Ecology. He has a master's degree in range management, 15 years in Department of Ecology and Water Planning, 5 years with Spokane Conservation District as a water resource manager, and 40 years in natural resource management. So please welcome Doug Ellen.
Thanks, Vince, and I want to thank Larry and the Rome Grange for putting this on. I think it was you know, these kinds of discussions are really helpful, and I think we need more of them, and hopefully we'll see more of the same in the future. So I'm going to be brief. I am not going to go into a lot of detail, but I'm going to try to hit each question at least briefly. My son has a baseball team, has practice at 1 o'clock, and I'm an assistant coach, so I plan on being there. I'll start off with the first question. So in your opinion, what are the major issues today in Whatcom County? And I would say Carl was hit I had a list here at on here that I wrote out as far as what I think are the priorities. Carl hit all of those and a couple more. But I want to tell you what my priorities are as manager of the Bellingham Field Office. And they, in no particular order, it's irrigation, agricultural irrigation in North County. That's a problem that's of how to deal with that has gone back to the 1990s when we started seeing a lot of, in 1992, we had a person hired down in the Bellevue field office, the Bellevue regional office. His name was Buck Smith, and his first day on the job, he asked his boss, "What do you want me to do, boss? I'm here to go to work." And he said, "You know, why don't you go up to Whatcom County? I hear there might be a few issues with irrigation up there." And he did, and you know what hit the fan? Ever since then, it's been a struggle. We said, "Look, you guys, we know there's a lot of you that that are irrigating without a permit." And at the time, the deputy director said, "Look, if you guys all apply for the water that you're using, then we're going to see if we can figure out how to address this." And here we are, you know, 20 years later, and we're still working on it. So you know, no easy answer. You'll see that this is a theme that goes through these. Another one is treaty rights and in-stream flows. When we completed the Weimer 1 watershed management plan through the watershed planning process, it was adopted in 2005 by the county council, and follow-up to that was a detailed implementation plan. So what are the things we're going to do to try to address the issues we identified in the plan? And one of those was the in-stream flow action plan. And so as far as I'm concerned, and I think probably shared by many of the other planning unit members at the time, is that was job one. we need to figure out what we need for in-stream flows so that we know how much water is available for additional out-of-stream uses. And that was the primary job of the watershed planning unit in the first place. That's the primary thing that the watershed plan was to address, along with other things, including in-stream flows. But we realized that we've got to get a handle on that before we know what we've got to work with. We worked on that for about 4 years after the plan was adopted, and here we are now 4 years after the discussions we started on that with the tribes, because we wanted to one of the things we need to quantify was what are the tribes' treaty rights around in-stream flows. And since then, the tribes have requested the Department of Interior, the federal government, to quantify their rights with a federal process. And so here we are. We're still working on that. No easy answers. Next one is exempt wells, which, you know, I think all of us here could probably talk for an hour on every one of these topics and still not hit it all. This is another good example of that. Right now we've got the Whatcom County has appealed a decision by the Growth Management Hearing Board on needing to determine legal availability water for exempt well use, for all uses, but including exempt wells in the rural areas. We're going to be dealing with that for a while. It's gone to appeals court, and it'll either be settled outside of the appeals court in some kind of settlement discussions, or it will be settled by the appeals court. We'll participate in all of that. And there'll be questions about our existing in-stream flow rule. So back to in-stream flows again. No easy answers. The Watershed Planning Unit is working again. They reconvened after sort of a hiatus of a few years, and I support that. I hope that they're successful. You know, we knew that when the watershed plan was completed and adopted in 2005, it wasn't done. It's not it's not a one-time and we're done deal. Watershed planning is going to go on forever. My only hope is that the Watershed Planning Act was established with certain specified decision-making process for certain things. For example, when we recommended that the plan be adopted by the council, that was by consensus by all of the initiating governments and a majority vote by the rest of the caucuses. I would hope that that group continues to operate under some form of consensus decision-making. And my personal opinion is that by consensus decision-making, you bring people together, they're forced to address each other's concerns, so that you end up with a enduring solution that everybody can support. If it's a simple majority vote or some other decision-making process, a lot of times what you end up with is the losers will do everything they can to oppose whatever is resolved to be a solution. And it's not an enduring way to solve the problems. In-stream flows, we come a long way around to, that's another one that there's no easy solutions, but there's going to be a lot more discussion on that. One thing I will say is that there's a lot of concern about discussions about exempt wells, about people having exempt wells, existing ones or getting new ones that will be shut off because of junior status to certain rights. And I can tell you that I don't know of any situation in the state, in the history, where we have shut off water to in-home use for exempt wells. And I mean, the exemption established by the legislature in 1945 is really strong. In establishing in-stream flow rules in some basins, there have been some restrictions put on that. The Skagit is one that's a little bit up in the air. There have been some issues around new homes being constructed with exempt wells, but no one has had their exempt well use shut off in their home that I'm aware of. And particularly those that exist, I mean, that's just not going to happen. In certain circumstances, we have said through rulemaking or through other situations where use of outdoor watering could affect other senior users, not just in-stream flows, but other senior uses, that we have curtailed or placed some kind of restrictions on outdoor watering, but not shutting off potable water inside to a home. The other one that is important, a priority for us, is the high nitrates in North County. And so we have that's a two-pronged issue that we have to deal with. One is, how do we get potable water that's not contaminated with high nitrates to these waters? So mainly there's like 12 water systems that right now, as Steve explained, are sort of red tagged. They have to find a solution to their high nitrates, or face penalties, or being shut down or turned over to the county in receivership. So we have two ways to deal with that. One of them is sort of the immediate one, and that is to get them an alternative source of water. And that's a big deal for us. It's a big deal for the State Department of Health. It's a big deal for the county. It's certainly a big deal for these water systems. We've been working for, as Steve said, he's been working on it for 20 years. I've been working on it ever since I've been here in Bellingham, so that's 10 years, trying to figure out a way to get a legal and potable alternative source of water to these folks. And we're still working on that. And that's part of the Bellingham. We've been working on a way to use Bellingham water for that. We've looked at other sources. Sumas has been, we've already processed a change that would allow us to use some of Sumas's water in some of the water systems with high nitrates east of Linden. And we've looked at other sources too. So that's another one that's, man, it's just a hard issue. It's going to take a while. It's no easy answers. But it's one that we're going to have to continue to work on as well. And I've already gone probably at least 5 minutes, so I better pick it up. So the next question is, on the resolution on the water action plan, we support that. We're going to participate in the questionnaire part. We may have to wear a couple different hats. We've got the Whatcom Clean Water Program, which is the part of the fecal coliform issue for shellfish beds. That group may weigh in, which we're a part of. And then, as far as water resources issues, we'll probably participate in the questionnaire as a regional or a field office. And so I'll be working probably with some of my water resources folks to do that. We'll provide any additional technical assistance that requested or required to help resolve issues that come out of it, to help focus the discussion and whatever's needed to the extent that we can. And so I'll commit to that. And I hope that that helps us kick this stuff down the road. I'm not sure in number 3. I wasn't sure what let's see. It was I'm sorry. Well, there was a regional water plan that was discussed. I thought that the reference was to the coordinated water system plan update. And so if so, that's one that's being, I think, from the last I've heard, that's being coordinated by Whatcom County. And so that's all I really know about it, but that's supposed to be coming. It's something that comes around about every 10 years, Steve? How often does that come up?
It used to be 6 years, but now it's based upon
So that's one that, you know, we're marginally involved in. We will be, you know, it gets back to water rights and planning for water use. We're involved to some extent. We'll support it to the extent we can. And then the Bellingham question, we've sort of discussed that. So I'm going to stop there with walking through questions, but the one thing I want to just stress is the theme through all this is that there are no easy answers to this. It's not going to happen fast. What it takes is people getting together and working through these issues so that not everybody's going to win every point, but what we need to do is work together to find solutions that we can support. These issues are really polarized. People are on one side or the other a lot of times. And I've worked in Spokane County for a long time. They've got issues. I've seen other counties, worked in other counties with other counties on water issues. Whatcom County's got it all. And I mean, it's, when you look at the number and intensity of water issues, water quality, water resources, shorelines, this is an amazing place. We've got a lot of resources, but it's tough. I'm just, you know, you got to persevere. You got to keep working on it. You keep coming back to the table. It's the only way it's going to happen. There's no silver bullet. So, thanks.
Well, thank you, Doug. We're going to be moving into our question and answer period here pretty quick. So what we're going to do with that is I'm going to actually grab one of these wireless mics, and Greg is going to have it. And I'm actually going to have you kind of come and form a queue over here by Greg. And that way we can get through the questions. But before I do, I just want to take a moment to recognize some of the other elected officials that we have here. So from the city of Bellingham, we have Michael Lilliquist, so city council member. And I believe he's the only other one. Is there anybody else that's a elected member from Whatcom County? So I'm going to take a little bit of a moderator prerogative, and if he has anything, I'm willing to offer him about 5 minutes. He doesn't have anything to bring perspective of the Bellingham legislative branch. So, all right. Every politician likes to talk, right? So that's why I'm saying 5 minutes. So you got about till 11.
I'll take 2 minutes, I hope. I agree that the city of Bellingham has a role to play. We have significant water rights, not just in the Lake Whatcom, which wasn't talked about much. It's a separable problem from the Nooksack Basin, a larger basin, more complex problems. And oddly enough, Lake Whatcom's been bedeviling the city for 20 years, and I think it's the easier nut to crack than the one out of the Nooksack Basin. We do have water rights that are from the Middle Fork of the river. I personally believe that those can be used to help agriculture in Whatcom County. I'm more concerned about the idea of using Bellingham water rights to serve other problems, for example, nitrate issues. I think that the city of Bellingham has obligations to a prosperous Whatcom County, but I think we also have obligations to support wise land use planning. And the degree to which our water rights might support unwise land use planning, I personally wouldn't be supporting that. But when it comes to agriculture, I'm 100% behind that solution if we can work it out.
Thank you, Michael. So at this point, we'll move into questions, and please remember to keep your questions, not comments, your questions to under a minute. And it looks like Greg is going to be holding the mic for you, so it helps to keep people under that 1 minute. So.
This actually follows up very nicely to Michael's. I'm Terry Wexler of Bellingham, and this actually continues from Michael's statement, not from a Bellingham-centric perspective, but from a perspective of a county resident who would hope my son would be able to farm here 30 years from now. He's an artisan cheesemaker. It's a pretty water-intensive use. So my question is this. We keep hearing about the high level of nitrates. Nitrates or nitrites? I always get that wrong. Thank you. In the north part of the county. And according to Carl's slides, 92% of that contribution is coming from ag. And then we hear that the short-term immediate solution are the excess water rights that Bellingham holds, but we also know the Middle Fork and the Nooksack, not only with all the competing uses and in-stream flow issues, will be declining over the next 20 to 40 years as the glacier melts and because of climate change and populations increase. And there's all these competing needs for that water. So my question is, what are we doing in the North County? If we keep going to the Middle Fork, we're just pushing the solution of the aquifer down the road to my kids and their kids to deal with. So are we at least doing anything, Department of Ecology, to stop the pollution of the aquifer? Or are the nitrates just increasing and increasing so that the cost of eventually addressing that problem, whichever generation has to address it, is going to have a 10 times bigger problem than we have right now?
Good question, and when I talked about two prongs, I forgot the other prong, and that is to stop pollution of, too much nitrate going into the groundwater in the first place. Because if we can handle that at the sources, then we don't have a problem with groundwater, high nitrates in groundwater affecting water systems or exempt wells, and which the source of which, I think it's shared between, there are a couple studies that have been done recently. One of them is this Sumas Blaine aquifer nitrate contamination study, is an ecology study. There's another one that was done by Western Washington University, and so these are can be you can get to these online if somebody wants to get a copy digitally. You can email me or contact me, and I'll see that you get one. But essentially, the biggest share comes. This is from our study. The biggest share comes from manure applied to crops, mostly from dairies, and from irrigation from fertilizers. Most of that's probably berries, but it's inorganic fertilizers. So that's the blue and the red, right? There's others. There's septic systems. There's animals. There's wildlife. You name it. But the ones that we can control the most are those. So how do we address that? It's a difficult issue with we have dairies and other livestock operations that generate manure. It's got to be dealt with. Most of the time, what they try to do is apply it at agronomic rates so that there's an uptake, so that it doesn't get into the soil profile and down in the groundwater. We've had trouble, apparently, in the past in making that happen. Usually it's an over-application that causes problems at the wrong times of the year. Some of it comes from Canada. We know that. In this study, which is done by Western, they suspect that mostly where it's coming across the border, it's probably affecting the very northern strip along west of Sumas, around Sumas, not so much further south. But we own some of that. We've been working with Canada through this Abbotsford Sumas Aquifer Joint Task Force. The Canadians have been having trouble with that lately, with the BC Ministry of Environment in getting funding for their guys to work on this. We're working with them, trying to help them find solutions to their sources, but we got our own to deal with as well. No easy solution there. It's something that we're working on, but it's the issue is usually cost. But the thing is, if cost is such an issue so that it's not dealt with adequately, then it's the water systems who have to pay for it. So you got to make it equal.
Could I just? I think the question and Doug's response also just as another way of identifying the water quantity issue here, because when the 2.5 to 3 years that there were negotiations going on the Bertrand surface water stream flow with the tribes, it's clearly identified that the amount of water that comes across the border in Bertrand flowage, about half of the Bertrand flowage is actually, surface water flowage area is actually in Canada. And the inability for folks on this side of the border to regulate or control the amount of water that's left in the stream in terms of water quantity is a major problem. We don't have any effect on that. That's really all up to the folks on the other side of the border. The other is that when Marty, I think, referred to it earlier, about the use of the biggest storage area in Whatcom County is the Sumas Abbotsford Aquifer. But how we're able to use that recharge reservoir in terms of water quality and water quantity is a major factor, and how it relates to the impact of water coming across the border underground, and what ability we have to use the water even if it's cleaned up is a major factor. So I just think it highlights another major issue as to how we can manage the water quantity issue in the county.
One last thing. Right now, the best tools we got to deal with this are for folks to go talk to the Natural Resources Conservation Service or the Conservation District, Whatcom Conservation District, and try to just do a better job of managing when they apply and where they apply.
Just one last comment. The old term about biting, pieces of the elephant off at one at a time. One of the things that's happened over the last 10 years, I think there's 5 now digesters in the county that convert manure, animal waste to electricity and reduces the amount of the potential pollutant out on for land disposal. The PUD actually worked with Western Washington University on a couple of studies to take the methane output from those digesters and turn it into use for vehicle fuel. Those kinds of, I think, little pieces should be put into the puzzle to help resolve the nitrate problem and the excess nutrients that farmers produce out of their operation. But
Okay.
Wendy Harris. I'm wondering if part of the problem we're having is that the approach we're taking is wrong. And the approach we're taking is this very project-specific, this issue by this issue, and prioritizing things according to public opinion and politics and money availability. And from everything that I know, the best way to deal with environmental problems is to do a watershed by watershed characterization and inventory of all the ecosystem functions. And then based on what's developed from that, that's the information that determines what the best projects are, where you get the most bang from your buck, and how to move forward. And so I know that's a more expensive approach, and I'm not advocating endless science, but it seems like something like the Birch Bay watershed characterization pilot study really was a good example of how we should be moving forward and examining these kinds of issues holistically and in a watershed-based context. So I'd like to hear responses about that.
I'll take a quick response and then I'll hand it off quickly. The list of contacts that's on the table over there, and here it is. The first 8 are from the Weimer 1 Planning Unit website. A lot of that's really the approach that we tried to take with the planning unit starting in 1998 and ending with the watershed plan. In the detailed implementation plan, there were a lot of recommended actions that came out of that. And I think that's still the intent. But, you know, we have, you know, one of the things we wanted to look at was in-stream flows. We got stuck on that. And I don't know, and the county made some efforts also in prioritizing projects based on the plan. And, you know, we're still working on that stuff. I agree with you that that's the approach we should be taking, and I think that's really what we're trying to do. It is hard when there are silos, and that's something we need to just keep working on, is how to bring those together to make sure that we're not working crosswise with one purpose or another.
In regards to that is a lot of some of what we're trying to achieve with the WID process, basin by basin. That being said, it's my opinion, and I think opinion of some others, we're not willing to wait for endless 20 more years. We have farmers that have legal issues with the state of Washington, and to the degree that each individual farmer is going to continue to work to legalize their water rights situation, whether it's through pulling off the streams and exchange for adding acres, or whether it's basin by basin or individual by individual coming up with mitigation plans that the Department of Ecology can accept. We're all in favor of the grand design, grand plan. We want to be a part of that. But we're not in the position to sit and wait. So we have multiple farmers that they themselves are spending their own resources, probably more on the ground projects that have been happening in the agricultural industry than anything else. The WIDS will be a perfect process for exactly what you are talking about. But we have issues we have to address today. And each individual farmer and corporately as an agricultural industry, that's where we're at today. And we believe there are solutions out there. Couple things questions that weren't answered. Number one, who uses the most water? That's a more difficult question to answer than just how much is pumped. Yes, agriculture might use the most water for irrigation, but agriculture it obviously stores more water under the ground than any other user. Urban areas flash off water during the high flow water periods. Agriculture is are almost entirely in rapid recharge zones. And as Doug talked about the minimum stream flow that was put in place in 1985, also Ecology, in their own writing, said that it's important that farmers go to groundwater because we have an abundant source of groundwater in Whatcom County, and we do. A lot of farmers, including myself, made decisions based on that opinion, pulling off streams. So this is really complicated, but tomorrow morning we could open up the paper and we could be in a lawsuit. And we in agriculture cannot afford to wait around forever. We have to try and work as hard as we can to rectify our issues with the state of Washington as far as permitting. And we will do that.
And just a follow-up to that, in 2007, we presented a talking paper to county staff, and essentially what that proposal was to look back at the Watershed Management Plan and the Watershed Management Act that Doug referred to. And the PUD had been involved in that process all along, from 1998 up through 2007. But one of the things that we indicated that we felt that the direction that the local planning effort took that was not necessarily aligned with what we felt the intent of the act as adopted by the legislature was. The number one identified need in the Watershed Planning Act was to determine water quantity. And the many years that we spent in the watershed planning management plan development, we focused on in-stream flow. And ultimately, yes, to look at watershed management to meet the ecological needs of both human and animal, fish, whatever, ultimately that's what we need to look to. But the balancing, finding out what water is needed out of stream was clearly not the focus of that planning effort. And what we suggested to county staff at the time was that we needed to bring together a coalition of out-of-stream users, agriculture, cities, PUD, those water purveyors and water users with a clear focus of finding just what we've talked about this morning. What water is needed, where it's used, and how we can start modifying our legislative process, our legal process, working with the regulatory agencies to figure out how we can move and share that water and move it around. And we still haven't gotten there. We started a process back in 2008, working with the smaller cities, inviting ag, who was represented then by Farm Friends and Henry Beerlink, to sit at the table and figure out, was there an interest in forming such a coalition? And there was, and that led to, along with the outcome of, or the lack of outcome, if you would, on the negotiations for on the Middle Fork and the Bertrand flowage, with what is called the Lower Nooksack strategy, and which was endorsed by the tribes. But it's all about that Lower Nooksack strategy, and I'll just read the title to that. We called it Achieving Economic and Environmental Certainty and Water Availability for the Lower Nooksack River Basin. The idea here again was to look at what water needs there are out of stream. Look at the realistic issues that agriculture is facing, that some of the smaller water associations, well, not just the smaller water associations, some of the larger water associations are facing in terms of water rights, and look at how that whole decision-making process can be tied into land use planning, because that's ultimately, that's what this is all about, finding and securing water and certainty around the water availability for whether it's residential, whether it's agriculture, whether it's excuse me, industry in the county. And the tribes also, in support of that work, clearly in that discussion, we identified that if this region ever gets into, whether it's an adjudication or whether it's a declaratory action that the tribes now have requested, at some point, some judge is going to have to make a decision on whether or not there's a balance of water available for in-stream and out-of-stream. And this gets back to my comment before about Carl's proposed water action plan. I think that if you bring together and really develop a focused approach on water management rather than individual projects, I think that that will help us get to a solution.
Quick housekeeping item. One of the great things about government is that we come up with these alphabet soups, kind of acronyms and all this kind of stuff, and it's been brought to my attention. Not everybody here is from a government agency or a government bureaucracy or an elected official, and so we don't always understand all the terms that are used. One of the terms was WID, which is the Watershed Improvement District. Some of the other terms are the WIRA, which is the watershed resource inventory area. We're in resource inventory area 1 here in Whatcom County, which is basically the Nooksack Basin. So please remember in your questions and in the remarks that you don't assume that everybody understands your acronyms that the agency or the agencies speak that we always use. So thank you, and please remember, keep the questions and comments short. We've about 20 minutes on 2 questions, so thank you.
Hey Doug, this is for you. Out in the county, there are thousands of small hobby farms. They're all running on exempt wells. They do not have water rights. I've noticed on dry years they're starting to irrigate 1 or 2 acres under that exempt well permit. Do you think that's a legal use of their exempt well water right?
For under the exemptions, one of them is for industrial. And industrial, the Supreme Court decided that agriculture is industry, and so that falls under the industrial exemption. That means that you can pump up to 5,000 gallons a day to irrigate with, and however many acres you can make that serve, that's what you can use. You can also pump up to 5,000 gallons a day, which means that you can store that water and use it later. Of course, storage is expensive, but it gives you an idea.
My name is Jean Waite. I'm a county resident for 18 years. I will ask my question first and then briefly explain why I ask it. My question is, we've talked a lot about water rights. Should we incentivize water responsibility, water conservation, watershed services, water storage, watershed services such as maintaining forest canopy? It was mentioned that 1945 solid rules, etc. Well, I think it's pretty evident that, and we're not talking about it much, nature has changed the rules on us. And when you talk about water being enough water, it doesn't make sense because timing is everything. Too much water in the winter, not enough in the summer, that doesn't by itself make a happy average. And we've alluded to that a little bit. But so the bigger question about there's enough water is for what uses? And water for thirsty crops, water for sprawl, water for influx of climate refugees, population growth. So I'll address my question, I think primarily, time is short, to Mr. Weimer and Mr. Hutchings. But I am interested in how we're going to incentivize behavior we want to see.
And I think we're already doing that to a grand degree in a lot of our programs. I think we need to use a kind of an all of the above thing. And up until recently, we've kind of used regulations in hopes that people will follow them, and that hasn't always worked well. Now we're moving more towards incentives. So like in the Lake Whatcom watershed now, people who get in line early may get incentives as far as tax money to help retrofit their properties to provide less phosphorus into the lake. There's talk in places like Birch Bay where we've created stormwater districts that there's a fee that you pay, and I'll just use a round number, $100 a year to help keep pollution out of Birch Bay. Well, if you install your own stormwater issues, or if you somehow take care of your own property, that fee could be reduced to provide an incentive for people doing the right things. I think there's lots of built-in incentives too. Ag certainly has gone to lots more efficient irrigation because they know there's an incentive for using water correctly. So I think there's a lot of built-in incentives in these things.
Yeah, like Carl said, a large part of the agriculture industry has done that a long time ago by going to micro irrigation. We probably use half the water per acre that we used to do with overhead irrigation and the type of inefficiencies that brings with it. But you know what that's done to us? With use it or lose it, we've lost a big chunk of our water rights. So use it or lose it to me is just totally unfair to agriculture. It was part of the code that was put in, I believe, clearly, to have an upstream user that has a water right quits farming, not using the water anymore, to put to beneficial use to the downstream user. It's been flipped on its head. You don't use the water to the full extent of the right within 5 years. You go to transfer it. They do the, what do you call that? ACQ calculation. And guess what? You've lost your water rate, and that's where we sit today.
And in the legislature, including Vince, who's been a champion of trying to address that issue with, particularly with a lot of the berry growers who went from sprinkler to drip in the 1990s, trying to get that, because the intent of the ACQ bill was not to squelch all those water rights. It was intended to encourage people to go more efficient. Anyway, so annual consumptive quantity. So it's the amount of water that the plants actually use. And anyway, so that's been, we've tried to find solutions to that for a long time, but right now they're still hanging out there.
Okay, I think you guys covered it very nicely. Thank you, Carl. Okay, John Kirk, Sumas, Washington. We have a rural 5, and we looked into water rights for wells about 10 years ago and found out that we were junior. Anyway, I have a question for Mr. Jilk. With regard to Open Public Meetings Act, in the several years that we've been involved in these issues, there's a sense of small groups that develop a narrative within their own circle, not based on the reality of what is happening. And to me, my question is, what can be done to mitigate that with open public meetings, especially as it relates to the joint board process and to the executive sessions that the PUD has had? And the sense we have is that these are discussions where there's sensitivities from the tribes, and so I know when you're doing exploratory things, you don't want to, create lots of problems, but at the same time, we've developed this membrane of suspicion in the county, and it goes both ways, in Bellingham against county people and in the county against the Bellingham area. So what can be done to improve open public meetings access?
Two things. One, in response to the question specifically to the PUD's executive session, at least in my time with the PUD, the only time that we've utilized an executive session to discuss water rights is relative to the tribe's declaratory judgment request, and for our legal counsel to advise our PUD commission as to the direction or the status of that action by the tribe. And that we've checked, we wanted to make sure that the public is protected and to make sure that the decisions that are discussed, not made, but discussed in executive session meet the intent of the Open Public Meeting Act. In response to, though, the broader question, I would just say that I think that the more that we can align all the governmental decision-making processes around water resources with land use planning, and assure that all those discussions, whether they're held by the elected officials or the designated advisory bodies to the elected officials, that they clearly are functioning in that Open and Public Meeting Act environment. And the more that we can move these discussions to specifically under the direction of the elected officials in the county, I think that that's the way we can reinforce that open and public dialogue.
Chris Halterman, Whatcom County, and my question is directed first to Mr. Maberry and then to Mr. Weimer and Mr. Hutchings. First question, you mentioned something about a large water resource found glacier. Is that the one referred to that's happened out at Birch Bay, where they have a large aquifer or well, and it's like 700 feet down? Number one, I'd like you to address that. And then Carl and John, what about the diversion there from Bellingham that goes into Lake Whatcom that contributes more phosphorus than anybody is willing to admit to? And how are we going to deal with that, please?
The large underground river that I was talking about was a story out of not the PI, Times now. They discovered a underground river that flows into Puget Sound that is bigger than the Columbia and the Amazon rivers, which are the two biggest rivers in the world. So my tie-in there is there are resources of water out there that we know nothing about. And in this particular county, we haven't done a comprehensive deep water aquifer study, which one could say would be considerably out of hydrological continuity when you go 600-700 feet down. The Blaine Birch Bay Water Association is an example of that, not in continuity with the Nooksack River. In the tidal influence zone, so there's no impact to Dakota or California. There's creeks. There's got to be other sources of water that are deep that go through 200 to 300 feet of impervious clay in this county, and we need to do some work on trying to isolate other sources of water that are clean, that are deep water, nitrate solving issues, on and on we go, and supplies. So there's a lot of emphasis on diagnosing the problem, and in my opinion, not enough work on getting to the doctor and getting the thing fixed.
I think the question was about the diversion from the Middle Fork into Lake Whatcom and how that attributes to phosphorus into the lake. You know, there's a number of kind of almost urban legends about what's happening in Lake Whatcom, and that's one of them. The other one is that we used to have a lot more water flowing through the lake when GP was in operation, and that flushed things through. There's a shade of truth in all of those, but when you dig into the science of the reality of them, none of those are really a solution to the problem. And certainly the diversion from the Middle Fork, and I'll let John talk about the quantification and what they're doing about it, does put some phosphorus into the lake. You know, it's not the magic bullet. I think it's in 10 to 15% of the phosphorus coming into the lake, but it's a little bit different type of phosphorus. The reality is when DOE figured their TMDL that requires us to reduce phosphorus by 87%, they didn't include that amount. So if we can fix it, it's almost a freebie because it's not included in the 87%. If they had included it, we would have had to fix the lake by something higher than 87%. So one way or another, it isn't changing what we have to do around the lake. At 10 or 15%, even if we turned all of that off, we still have a huge task in front of us to fix the lake.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, the reality is that at the point that the TMDL, which stands for total maximum daily load, for phosphorus, it's actually for dissolved oxygen, but the load of phosphorus is what drives that equation. At the point in time that was done, it was based on diversions that the city was taken out of the Middle Fork about between the years of 2000, 2003, something like that. And over the course of time since then, the average, the 5-year average, if you will, reduction in diversion rates out of the Middle Fork has been reduced by 4 or 5-fold. And on top of that, since that time, there was a study done to sort out just how much water coming off the glacier contributes to the flow of the Nooksack at the Middle Fork diversion, and that number is really small. It's about 3% or so during most of the year, with the exception of the months of July, August, and September, when it reaches a number of about 8% or so. And so if you put those two graphs together in your head, what you see is a fairly low proportion of water coming off of that glacier that could be carrying sediments, glacial sediments, the source of this potential phosphorus, and then a substantial reduction in diversions. So that equation leads one to the point where yes, there is a contribution. The contribution is relatively modest. We are and have been over the course of the last year gathering actual data at the outflow and at the diversion itself to quantify exactly how that plays out in terms of pounds of phosphorus, so that we can then, over the course of the next year or so, develop a new diversion rule that puts the timing of the diversion more in line with the low phosphorus times of the year. So there are steps being taken. It is significant enough to warrant attention. As Councilmember Weimer mentioned, it's not the silver bullet.
I'm Kate Blystone, Program Director with Resources for Sustainable Communities. I have a three-part question, but I swear it's really fast. And two of them are for Steve. And the last part is for Carl, Doug, and John. First two parts, how much of your water right at the PUD do you already use? And are you subject to that beneficial use provision? I'm guessing the answer is no, but answer that for me. The second part is for John, Carl, and Doug. What would it take to get the info that we need? I mean, I'm talking dollars, time, about groundwater, because we've heard a lot of talk about lack of information about hydraulic continuity and other questions related to quantity of groundwater availability. So, thank you.
Very quickly, the PUD has actually three water rights for diversion off the Nooksack River at two different locations, one about 2 miles upriver from the city of Ferndale, one basically in the city of Ferndale at Pioneer Park. And cumulative, those rights amount to about 54 million gallons a day. And we are not subject, based upon the Washington Supreme Court ruling, we are not subject to the use it or lose it relinquishment of any of those rights. We are currently under contract for industries and other water associations to sell up to about 38 million gallons a day. We are currently pumping, treating, and pumping just under 18 million gallons a day.
I'll start on the second one. So there are parts of the Whatcom County and Water Resources Inventory Area 1 that we don't know much about groundwater and how it works and how it flows. The part that we know the most about is in the glacial deposits in the North County through most of the agricultural area that comes down from Canada, and that's that Abbotsford Sumas or Blaine Sumas aquifer, however you want to say it. But it's all that gravel and sand that's piled up from the glacial periods, and some of it's colluvial, some of it's alluvial. So some pushed by the glaciers, some water deposited. We know generally it flows from the northeast to the southwest, and that it's pretty high transmissivity. But what we don't know, well, we also know that the deeper you go into the aquifer, and it's highly variable as far as the depth, but the deeper you go, the more saline it gets. And that's not real usable for potable water supply or for irrigation. So the question that we want to be able to answer, though, if we're processing water rights, trying to find out how much water is available for additional out-of-stream uses, is if you punch a well and use that water, what's the effect on the nearest stream? Because the in-stream flow rule says, for a lot of that area, says that it doesn't say that it's just plain closed, like some rules. It says it's closed to further surface withdrawals and any additional groundwater withdrawals that would further impair flow. Now it's a high bar. all right? So if we were going to try to look at allocating any additional water, one of the things we'd like to be able to know is if you punch in that well, how much effect will it have on flow? If it's right next door to the stream and it's gravel and the effect may be 1-to-1. However, whatever CFS you pull out affects the stream flow 1-to-1. If you're 5 miles away or 2 miles away and it's sandy, number one, you may not have, the effect on the stream may be 5%. Number two, it may not affect the stream until December. Those are the kinds of things we need to know in order to make water rights decisions based on, and say with some certainty yes or no it will impair stream during the summer when flow is lowest. That is a lot more complicated, a lot harder to do, but it's been done, and so that's sort of where we want to get eventually.
Yeah, I think the answer to the question is, $300,000 on the order of will get you a long way towards some really usable information on which those kinds of decisions can be based. Now, in the saying of that, I realize that every time we go out and do a study, it unearths some other unknown, and it seems to go on forever, which is why we need to be really careful about defining the questions that we want answered. As Doug pointed out, there have been pressures over time to try and solve all the world's problems with these gigantic groundwater models that extend up into Canada, so on and so forth. They don't get us where we need to go. The reality is that Bertrand Creek, the area around Bertrand Creek, some around Fish Trap, those areas have been studied to a greater extent than much of the rest of the aquifer. There's a fair amount of data out there. If there's a collaborative effort in which the agricultural community is engaged so that there can be access to some of those wells and so on and so forth for measuring water levels and those sorts of things, it will make the process that much more shorter and less expensive. And those conversations have been ongoing already. So I would expect over the course of this year to see that proposal get some airtime around the community and sort of be vetted in the public eye, and then the decision about funding, of course, has to be made.
Yeah, that's where hydrological modeling can come in. We made a request to the Department of Ecology. These streams are, in essence, closed all year long except the main stem of the Nooksack River. We made a request that Ecology would open those up to further withdrawals in the winter time or whatever. Basically, that was an administrative decision, if I'm not out of line here, Doug. And administrative decisions can be changed. But what we need is the information to tell us when our withdrawals are affecting those streams. So in other words, if they're affecting the streams during the time of high flow periods, Ecology may have the ability eventually to open those streams up when they're meeting minimum flow. So it's a little bit complicated, but that's where hydrological modeling can come in.
Just quickly on that same thing, and I saw John looking up the numbers, but because there was, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, there was a plan called the Lower Nooksack Strategy, which people have mentioned, that incorporated a whole bunch of these things. And that was moving forward, and it would have incorporated the groundwater study, which was about $300,000. It incorporates the coordinated water system plan, which I think was $200,000 to $300,000. The county did an RFQ for that, and I think that contract was awarded. It hasn't come to the council for approval yet, so that's moving too. But that whole Lower Nooksack Strategy was really moving the coordinated plan, the groundwater modeling that's needed to answer a lot of these questions, along with some of the water rights issues also. And a couple of years ago that got scuttled for political reasons, and now luckily it's coming back, and I think you'll see that moving forward to the council this year.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Volkart, and you'll have to excuse me, I'm not a public speaker by any means, so if I hum and haw, I get nervous, whatever. I know. I live in the rural areas and I've got a well. And one thing I never hear about, and I wanted to find out if this is being considered or if it should be considered, I think it should, is that many families use their outdoor water for food gardens and for flower gardens. And even if they don't, they know if things get tight, we're all a little nervous about that they can go out there and they're gonna make it maybe, or maybe their neighbors are gonna make it, you know, if they can get that food. And many people use their water for organic gardens because organic food is very, very expensive, and this is an easy way to get it cheaper. And so when you're considering cutting off that outdoor water use, I'm very concerned about that because they're going to be forced to buy it from a company, maybe from far away. It's a very inefficient use of getting food. And I'm very concerned about that, and it could come from out of the county. And then it's not really fair to say you can't grow it, but you can go to a company in the county and buy it. That's not fair. And it's not good for low-income people, and there's a lot of low-income people out in the county. And another thing about that is flower gardens. I don't see, flowers are not fluff. They're very important to life, to the quality of life. We use them for birthdays, marriages. We use them every day just to walk into the house after a hard day and go, oh, thank God it's there. You know, and the library agrees with me because I want you to look at that rhododendron out there. Okay, there you go, right there, right in front of your face. I'm very concerned that outdoor water use is not going to be considered, I think, I'm not a lawyer, a beneficial use. It is. And I don't see that in these plans at all. Well, I don't think the well people have very much political power. And that's my problem. Thank you.
Well, I'll take a first crack at that, and then maybe Doug can give you the real answer. The reality is, and you heard Doug from Ecology say that you know, these individual exempt wells have never been shut off anywhere in the state. When you look at the exempt well, it allows you 5,000 gallons a day. Households don't use 5,000 gallons a day. They use more like 200 or 300 gallons a day for the in-house use. So there's plenty of extra water within those permits for gardening and type of stuff. I live in a rural area, but I actually have to buy my water from the city of Ferndale, and it's painful when I'm watering squash and beans with city's water, I'll tell you, so I understand your concern. You know, if things really get tight and we have to define what's allowed and what isn't allowed, it may be that if you want a, you know, half an acre lawn, that's might not be allowed, but if you're trying to grow food to eat, I don't see political will to shut that off.
Yeah, I don't want to scare you, and I agree that there's never been existing homes shut off, but I want to go back to the tribal claim of senior water right. I don't think we can make guarantees to anybody. I think it's highly unlikely. But if the tribal quantification is, and it doesn't meet tribal quantification, and that's what the judges uphold, I can't guarantee that individual homeowners won't be shut off. I don't think so. I think that would be very highly unpopular. I think you have more political power than you think. But we're all in this to a certain degree. And I don't want to have people leave this room underestimating what the power of in-stream flow rights for stream flows that aren't being met, the results of what they could be.
So two parts that I want to hit on. One is that, so there are 4 exemptions. One is for livestock, one is for domestic use, one is for industrial use, and what am I missing? Those are the main ones. For domestic use, you can, as Carl said, you can use up to 5,000 gallons a day in your home. That is not for outdoor use. But as part of that domestic exemption, you can irrigate up to a half an acre of lawn or garden. And that's the way that's the exemption, that's the law. It's very strong. In some cases, in some watersheds under rulemaking, they have modified that, but until such time, in where rule hasn't amended that, the exemption stands. In Weimer 1, the way we have looked at that in the past is that the rule does not limit exempt wells in Whatcom County, and so that's how we've administered it, and that's in that case where we are here is that if you have a home and you're serving it with an exempt well, up to 5,000 gallons a day and up to a half an acre of lawn and garden. Until that changes, that's the way we're looking at it.
Marlene Dawson. This afternoon or this morning, Mr. Maberry mentioned something about this river flow, this 700 feet down river flow that's bigger than the Amazon and the Columbia. My question is, this would solve the in-stream flow problems, the farmers' needs. So my question is, who's going to control this water?
Well, that was in the Seattle area, so. Okay.
No, I heard it was in the Birch Bay. I heard it myself a couple of days ago. It's a different one? There's one in Birch Bay. Oh, okay.
Birch Bay is a deep water aquifer.
And how does that compare to the one in Seattle then?
Totally different. It's an underground aquifer, probably more than likely coming out of Canada, Fraser type thing. Nobody really knows for sure, but it kind of clips through the northwest part of the county. There's really not a lot of knowledge of how big it is, but the state of Washington controls the water resources for the state of Washington, at least right now.
I'm Greg Cooley. I grew up in Bellingham, and just listening to you guys, I was looking at that pie chart that shows how the water usage is divided up, and it looks like ag consumes a great portion of it. And you know, all the detailed studies that you guys have, and just kind of a simple thing occurred to me to ask is, if a farmer takes the water and grows a crop and brings it into the city and sells it for the people to consume and use, who really used that water? Was it the farmer, or was it the people that live in the city that bought the crops from the farmer to use? And does that ever get taken into account when we're looking at water usage?
Anybody? I think the simple answer is no. You know, some of that water goes back into the ground, but let's face it, during the summer, agricultural irrigation is by far the biggest water use. Once you get into the winter, you know what you have with municipal, industrial, residential use, that's pretty consistent across the year. Maybe a little higher in the summer because people irrigate lawns and gardens. Overall, over the whole year, yeah, agricultural irrigation is still by far the largest, but it's more so in the summer. Those other uses are pretty constant throughout the rest of the year. Yeah, well, you know, that's a good point. You know, this is a diagram from one of these studies that was done. This most recent water budget that was done as part of the Nooksack strategy. So this comes from there, and it shows you sort of how the Bertrand watershed works, which is pretty similar to a lot of the other ones. The blue lines represent water that's brought in from precipitation for Bertrand is rain. And so you can see we're generating, and these are All right, so we're generating a lot more water's coming down than we're using by far. You know, this is all plus. Once you get into the summer, we're actually in a deficit, and because water use goes up, rainfall decreases. If we can store some of this, well, that would be great. It's hard to store water in the flat area of North Whatcom County. It's hard to find a place to store it, and it's not cheap. That's the problem. You know, well, that's a good point. We do not mine our aquifer. It is recharged every year. The problem comes in if that water table drops to a certain level, it starts to affect in-stream flows. But we know it's coming back every year. That's not the problem.
Hence the concept of mitigation in the summer. That's where that comes from. That's where that idea comes from.
Hi, I'm Danielle. My question is, if the irrigation water starts using a lot of groundwater and it lowers the water table, is there any concern that's going to affect people's potable water, nitrate levels in wells more, chance of more, if it's being recharged from surface water more, if, you're going to get more violations of E. coli and total coliform in people's water?
I don't think there's a connection there with fecal coliform or other pathogens. I suppose there could be if the stuff is floating on top of the water surface of the aquifer, but generally, irrigation wells, I haven't heard of many cases, a few, once in a while we get a complaint of an irrigation well affecting a potable well. But in those situations, you're probably talking about wells that are like 12 feet deep. That really ought to probably be a little deeper. But it's the best water, the potable water in that Abbotsford-Sumas aquifer, the Sumas Plain, is mostly pretty shallow anyway. So it can happen. Yeah, it can happen. We don't see it very often.
I would say, common sense would probably tell you that usage is a good flushing mechanism versus the other way around. If there is a contaminant, flushing that aquifer occasionally is of benefit.
The only caveat that I would add to that, though, is that I understand that EPA is looking at developing regulations on testing for certain identifiable contaminants such as nitrates and nitrites, or nitrites and nitrates, that would indicate the existence of bacteria that we don't now test for, and that could ultimately result in water quality requirements on individual wells as well as water systems pulling groundwater out. So the answer to that question could be wait to see what the regulations.
Andy Ross, Whatcom County, and it's been mentioned a few times that the lower Nooksack strategy was scuttled due to political reasons. I'm curious how we can avoid those political reasons or issues in the future. And I agree with Steve Jilk that we need a comprehensive, collaborative approach. I still see a lot of turf out here. Not right here, but when I look at the water issues, what can we do differently? What did we learn from the lower Nooksack strategy political process so that we can move forward and implement something that will work?
We can eliminate it by getting rid of the county council and having the county ruled by an imperial dictator.
Well, I'm not volunteering for that job. You never can take politics out of it. What I think we saw in that, and I wasn't clear on why that got scuttled, because it seemed like a pretty good plan. But I think a lot of it was, it kind of came out of the blue, and a lot of the stakeholder groups did not understand what it was all about or why it was seemingly moving forward so quickly, even though for those of us that have been tracking this stuff for 15 years, it wasn't quickly at all. So I think there was lots of distrust about where it came from and what was going on. So I think the more we have forums like this, have a planning unit that is knowledgeable about what's going on, we can avoid those types of things.
I think one of the biggest problems is the fact that tribes aren't there, and I think if we could encourage them to get back, that would be good. Whether they will or they won't, but any kind of process that doesn't include the tribes is problematic, in my opinion.
I just want to just tag on that one of the first things you'll probably see happen if the tribes, if the federal government responds to the tribes' request to quantify their treaty reserve rights, is they will tell them, go and negotiate and see if you can come up with a settlement. So, you know, the likelihood that it's all going to be settled by lawyers is, well, I don't know what the likelihood is, but the first thing they're going to try to do is get a settlement. That means everybody's got to get together in a room and
I think the two things. One, Marty said that you know, if the tribes aren't there, it's clear. I said this before, that the development of the Lower Nooksack strategy and the work that was to propose to be completed under that really came out from the joint board, and the two tribes represented on the joint board fully supported the Lower Nooksack strategy work. I think the reason that it got scuttled, if you would, politically, and how that really happened was that the joint board staff that worked on this project and tried to come up with, you know, the work that needed to be done in the budget to support it, worked through the county executive's office at the time, as well as the Department of Ecology and some other agencies, the Port of Bellingham, small cities, coming up with a funding proposal. And one of the recommendations was to use some of the county's economic development fund to do some of this work. And the defense of that was that this is really all about providing economic security for land use, you know, land owners, industry, agriculture, cities, everybody. And so that's how it went forward. At the same time, there were, we were coming off of about 3 years of negotiations between the tribes, Department of Ecology, the city of Bellingham, and initially it included the Bertrand watershed. And I think there was a lot of concern about how those negotiations were going on, how confidential they were, how secretive they were, and at the same time, and I stated this a couple years ago, that the joint board, that the work that was going on, whether it was the negotiations for these two pilot projects or the development of this implementation strategy that we call the Lower Nooksack strategy now, there was this hiatus of the planning unit not being utilized. The joint board dropped the ball in not making sure that the planning unit, the public open process, was ongoing. And so I think that resulted in a lot of political pushback from folks saying, no, 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 no. This is all being put together in a secretive, bureaucratic, you know, non-elected official approach, and so let's just stop it. And I think that's how it got stopped, not realizing that the work, as Carl indicated now, you know, that the work needs to be done. Some of the work is progressing. The water budget was part of that process. The groundwater work that hopefully will come forward is part of that. But I think that those are some of the reasons that it got pushed.
Personal opinion, the joint board and the planning unit should stay connected. They really will help each other in the long run.
And with that, we are at the close of our event today. So I want just to take a moment for everybody to thank the members of the panel for their discussion. And if you guys enjoyed this forum, I welcome you back. Saturday, May 17 is going to be the second forum. This kind of the intent of this is to have kind of a four-forum panel discussion. So the second forum will be Saturday, May 17, and kind of the outline or the theme of that one is going to be diverse perspectives on water and land use, and some of the tentative speaker lists from the organizations Cattlemen and/or the Farm Bureau, Land Development Caucus, FutureWise, Whatcom Business Alliance, Whatcom County Planning Department, Rural Water Systems, Fishing, Commercial and/or Recreational. So I think it's going to be a great opportunity. Once again, thank you to Rome Grange for putting this on. If you have any questions, feel free to contact Larry Helm at the Rome Grange. And also, if you enjoyed this and you're not able to attend next time, or you want to share this with your friends, it has been filmed. It will be streamed live again next time. It has been streamed live, and it will also be on YouTube, and I think whatcomworks.com.org. We'll have a link on that, so you can go and you can share this event with your friends, and then also stream future events if you can't actually be there in person. So thank you again, and I think when we kind of to close this up, when we look at the wisdom of Mark Twain in his remarks about whiskey and water, perhaps what he was actually trying to say to us is, and this is perhaps, it's not definitive because Ecology hasn't ruled on it yet, but maybe, perhaps, if we drink a little bit more whiskey, there will be less fighting over water. So with that, thank you for being here and have a good night.